This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello, and welcome back once again to North Pod. It's been a little while since we've talked about the AFL men's program, so this week we're going to get a bit of an update on that. We're about 2 weeks out from the national draft, a little bit less actually, so I guess that's what's front of mind for most AFL fans at the moment. Haven't been any pick swaps for North Melbourne yet, and we're fast running out of time for that. We're nearly at that window. It closes Friday, November 8th, so probably when you're listening to this, that's either today or it's just passed. It does open back up on draft night, so it doesn't. If we don't get anything done before that deadline, there still is opportunity on the draft nights to make some swaps. Obviously, if it's pick 2 that's going to get swapped, that's going to need to happen pretty quickly on draft night. So yeah, look, we'll talk about the draft and heading into the draft throughout the episode. I've also just got a lot of other stuff to catch up on, I suppose. A few things have happened in the past couple of weeks that I've left them condensed. So most of this really isn't going to be news, but I guess I am going to be, sharing my thoughts around what's happened in these areas and what the club's been up to. So yeah, we're chat delistings, we're going to chat re-signings, we're going to have a look at the splitting pick 2 or not splitting pick 2 and what's happening at the draft level, and also have a look at us selling some games to Perth potentially, or it certainly looks like it is going to happen for the next couple of years. So I guess we'll sort of go mostly chronologically. The thing that happened the longest ago was Charlie Lazaro and Blake Drury were officially delisted after the trade period. So I think that was expected for the most part. I did wonder if potentially Lazaro was a chance to stay, just given the trades that we were able to make happen. Bringing in Jacob Constanti, I thought potentially was going to be the end for both Drury and Cooper Harvey, but that wasn't quite the case. It's Lazaro and Drury that have been shown the door. Ultimately, I think, these are pretty low-risk decisions. It's pretty hard to see either of those players going on to be absolute guns at other AFL clubs, and you kind of have to make a decision around depth versus development. And I think we can agree that neither of these players were, showing a high potential for future growth. And, sure, you could see them as depth, but we're not really in a place right now where we want that kind of depth. We're looking, development is our focus. And I think looking at the two of them, particularly Lazaro, who have put a couple more years of development into than Blake Drury, I just think it wasn't likely to happen. Anything can happen, you never know. But what we saw of Lazaro was that he was probably a little bit too good for VFL level. He's a good VFL player, but just not quite up to AFL standard, and certainly behind several others in the pecking order in terms of a midfielder at North Melbourne, and just, wasn't able to, play an impactful enough role either in the forward line or on a wing at AFL level. So based on our list profile, it just, it wasn't going to work out. He's not going to be better than those mids that are ahead of him, just based on his size and the sorts of skills that he has. Blake Drury, a little bit different, a rookie pick, so he's always going to be a bit of a roughie. And I think whilst he was the number one rookie pick in his year, at the end of the day, he still, wasn't selected at the national draft. The rookies that are selected are often players that you're just having a bit of a shot at. We gave him 2 years, and I think by the sounds of it, he got absolutely everything out of himself. Sounds like he's a ripper bloke and an absolute professional, but your standards and your professionalism can only get you so far, unfortunately. You've got to have some talent. You've got to have some, physical attributes that lend you to being an AFL footballer. And yeah, I'm just not sure, unfortunately, whether or not either of these players have those things. Both of them got some opportunities. Lazaro, obviously, more opportunities, and was often the sub just based on his role in the side. Blake Drury had some chances at halfback in 2023 and played some forward pocket games in 2024. And he had a great game, his first game this year. I think it might have been against Geelong, potentially, but I certainly remember giving him some votes in the North Podium. He played a really good half-forward game, but after that just wasn't able to replicate that or really show any other attributes that, meant that we'd be able to translate him into a different role. So, I think in terms of Drury, it's not a failure because really the rookie list is for experiments like this where you just hope that maybe they can become a role player. So not a failure on Blake Drury's part. Lazaro is a little bit different, a bit of an earlier draft pick, so one that you hope to get right. You're not going to hit all of them. So at the end of the day, it's whilst it's not a failure, the more picks like Lazaro that we do get right, the faster our climb up the ladder is going to be. And he wasn't an absolute fail as a player. He's just not quite at the level that we need. Nothing wrong with having a go, and same with Blake Drury. Nothing wrong with having a ping at these blokes. So ultimately, I think, it's a low-risk decision by the club, I guess. Neither of these players are players that, as I said off the top, we'd expect to go on and, have really successful careers elsewhere. I can't picture either of these becoming a Mason Wood type and, playing 100 games at another club. But I also wish them all the best because by the sounds of it, they're both ripper blokes. So if either of them were able to do that, I'd be super happy for them. The last thing I suppose I want to talk about here is, Blake Drury is the type of player that the rookie list exists for. I know that there are some people that think the rookie list needs a bit of a shake-up because clubs aren't really using it what it was initially intended for. And that is true. Clubs aren't using it that way. But I also just think it doesn't really matter. Like, why do we care? If they did get rid of the rookie list and just called them all senior list spots, which I think they should do, essentially that's how clubs are using it right now. So it's really is just it's just naming. At the end of the day, it's semantics. This is what the rookie list was intended for, to give blokes who potentially aren't quite good enough, but you want to give them a go. Or there's obviously those other categories of rookies where maybe it's an international player, maybe it's a player from a diverse background. We're giving them an opportunity. That's what generally the rookie list has been for historically. But more recently, we see that players getting picked up, or it's a way for clubs to shift senior players onto that. We've seen Jack Gunston's doing that at the Hawks. We're moving Toby Pink onto the rookie list, which I'm about to talk about. So it's super common for clubs to use it that way. It doesn't really bother me. I don't get too bothered about it, but I think we have to acknowledge that the rookie list has kind of served its purpose at a professional level. I think we'd be better off just folding it into the regulation lists size, I think, and everyone would be a little bit less confused about it. Anyway, Lazaro and Drury were delisted, unfortunately, and like I said, I wish them all the best. And I alluded to it before, but Toby Pink was moved to the rookie list, or is being moved to the rookie list from the senior list. So technically, he actually has been delisted as well, but we have committed to picking him up in the rookie draft, so to speak, so that he is rookie listed and stays on the list, and we sort of have to do that because he's got a contract. Hopefully, fingers crossed, no one pulls a reverse Hugh Greenwood on us here and steals him from us. Famously, that's how we ended up actually getting Hugh Greenwood, is that the Suns were delisting him to then reselect him, and during that period, David Noble and a few other North Melbourne senior officials were able to convince him to come across and I guess, renege on that deal and come and play for North Melbourne. So hopefully that doesn't happen with Toby Pink and we're able to snap him up as a rookie listed player. And this is just about giving us, more flexibility at the national draft so that we are able to, select more players at the national draft if we do get the points, the picks rather, and we're able to make some swaps. So it's really good of him to give us that flexibility. Like I said before, it does make the rookie list rules look a little silly because, again, we're not really using them the way that they're intended, but these are the guardrails and the constraints that the system has, so we'll do what we have to do. Ultimately, if they're going to keep the rookie list, you should just be able to flick a player like Toby Pink onto the rookie list because, it doesn't make sense. We'd like to keep him anyway. So Toby Pink's given us that flexibility, and, I think a player like Toby Pink is someone that I'm happy to actually be on the rookie list. He's a mature age player that we're kind of given a second chance. He's another one that you don't mind. It sort of fits the profile of the rookie list. So this gives us the opportunity potentially for us to select someone else at the national draft. Gives us another list spot, and yeah, it's great of Toby Pink to give us that flexibility. So alongside these delistings and rookie listings, we there was a re-signing. Cooper Harvey was the one of those kind of in limbo that ended up getting a deal for next year, a 1-year deal. And boy, he is a lucky man. No AFL games this year, played a couple last year, and shows some talent, no doubt, but definitely some concerns around his work ethic and the defensive side of his game. Also, I mean, his frame and his size. He's 180 centimetres, so he's 5 centimetres shorter than Paul Curtis, for what it's worth. We know, obviously, that his father, my favourite player of all time, Boomer, played the most AFL games of anyone as a very, very short man. So I'm not saying that it can't be done, and 180 is not tiny. I'm just not sure what role he can play for our side given his size. Paul Curtis does play a small type role, but he does, he plays a marking version of that. He can mark. He can take a mark on the lead. He's very, very, very strong for his size. Infamously, a massive bench presser at the club. So that's what Paul Curtis can bring. We obviously know that we've got a lot of those. Well, not a lot. We have several of those kind of smaller, craftier forwards on our list now with Robert Hansen Jr., with Jacob Constanti. So they're kind of options for that smaller, craftier, quicker type player. I'm just not sure which of those Cooper Harvey is going to lean or end up being, and if he's either of them really. When he does play, he is more of a lead-up marking smaller player, so more like the Paul Curtis role. My issue there is that I just don't think that we need a player of that profile in the side. Like I said, his defensive running has been an issue. So we saw in the preseason games all the way back in, I think it would have been February or maybe very early March, but probably Feb. We saw, I guess there were some clips that went around, or did the rounds, that potentially showed him not necessarily giving 100% effort, tackling and chasing in the forward line. And so, look, it's very easy to find an example or two of players not doing what's required of them. I think everyone's guilty of doing that now and then. But there's definitely there would be a reason why he wasn't able to find his way into the side for a single game this year. He did have some injuries, no doubt, but it's a pretty long season. So, and we're not exactly a side where players are banging down the door for opportunities. So, look, he's gotten a 1-year deal. I think he's pretty lucky. Is there potential that he's got that 1-year deal based on his surname? It is possible. I'm not going to speculate on that because I just don't know. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter now because he's got the deal. But he does need to make, if he's going to stay on the list, he needs to make a Jackson Archer-esque leap, which another father-son, so there's some parallels there, but I make the connection with Jackson Archer because he's another type of player that's maybe not super talented, doesn't necessarily have that raw athletic ability or physicality that some of the best players in the comp have, but he's got an immense work rate and he's really worked hard on his craft. That ultimately is, I think, what Cooper's going to have to do in order to find a spot in the side. It's going to be really hard because, like I said, there is competition for spots. I'm not going to go ahead and say it's, ludicrous competition, but there are forwards in there. If you think about, generally you might play 7 players that are forwards, certainly 6 and, some mids that might be able to roll through there. If you just list Nick Larkey, Cam Zurhaar, Zane Dersma, Paul Curtis, there's 4. You're going to have at least a Jack Darling and or a Bryn Teakle. And then I haven't listed Robert Hansen Jr. or a Jacob Constanti. There's so many options there that I think are ahead of Cooper Harvey, and that's probably the concern if you're him. So look, who knows? I certainly hope that he's able to rise to the challenge next year, but there's definitely question marks, and I think, between him and Drury, he's maybe a little fortunate because I think Drury's probably shown a little more, or certainly he has shown a little more at AFL level just because he's had more opportunity. But I do hope that Cooper, proves me wrong's a bit strong, but I really hope that he's able to prove himself this year, because it would be a wonderful story. We're about to get River Stevens on the list, we think, as another father-son. So we've got this crop of young father-sons that, whilst they're not high draft picks like some of the other sides, it would be great if they could be coming through. Bailey Scott's in there as well, as these players that, have a great history at the club. It's great to have that, nostalgia and history, but they can't be bit part players or players that are just there based on their surname. They need to be, getting selected on talent and form. And unfortunately, Cooper Harvey's not been able to show that in his couple of years so far, but he gets another year and, potentially he can make some strides next year. So that's kind of the list decisions that were made. And then I didn't mention this one off the top, but probably maybe the most significant news was Jaden Stevenson, who made the decision to retire with a year still to go on his contract. Came as a bit of a shock, I think, to many, but there had been some rumours floating around on, Reddit and Twitter, sort of around the time that the exit meetings happened. I sort of dismissed it, not as nonsense, but as unsubstantiated. So I guess, as it turns out, that talk obviously did originate from some truth. Whether or not who's leaked that, I'm not too sure. It's always interesting to consider where this kind of information might come out. But he has decided to retire. Like I said, still got a year to go on the contract. So my understanding is that there's going to be a negotiated payout there. He won't be paid his full salary, but he'll be paid a bit of next year. And, I guess that's totally reasonable. He's obviously not going to play any footy, but he's done the right thing by us and opened up a list spot again, like Toby Pink has, so that we are able to draft some talent if it comes across our desk, or pick up some delisted free agents potentially, or some players in that pre-season top-up period. So, yeah, a real shame from a talent perspective. Clearly had a lot of talent. I was actually reflecting on his first season with us, and he had some really fantastic games in that 2021 year. I think it's really easy to forget how fast and how skillful he was during that period, and his time at Collingwood too. We know he burst onto that scene in his debut season, and parts of Collingwood's forward line in that year were kind of built around him because he was such a dynamic, exciting player. We saw a lot of that in his first year with us, and then 2022 was a real downer. 2023, a really good first half of the year, not a great second half, and this year just wasn't able to get it going. And just such a shame, because there was clearly a lot of talent there. You have to wonder, that injury that he had mucking around on his bike in the off-season, where he broke his pelvis or his hips, you have to wonder to what extent that's really dented his speed and his explosiveness and therefore his capacity to impact, because, he was just such an explosive player. And I guess reflecting back and watching some of the footage from him playing in his debut season and in his debut season with us, he looked a different player to that this year. So it's kind of, from that perspective, it's easy to understand potentially this decision that he's made. But at the same time, he's still a relatively young player in his mid-20s. There was definitely an opportunity there if he had that spark and that hunger to play on. His reasoning allegedly for retiring is that he just doesn't have that hunger, that desire to, keep performing at the top level. And that is definitely something that you need to be an AFL player, I believe. It's not something that you can really just coast along and hope for the best. I think that potentially that's what he's been doing the last year or so, and it, clearly hasn't worked for him on field. But yeah, like I said, such an amazing talent. I think we all remember that Monday night game in Perth, 2021, playing West Coast in the wet, and he nearly single-handedly won us that game. We did win the game, but it was, nearly him just dragging us across the line. He had 38 touches, kicked a goal, and was just everywhere throughout that game. There's so many iconic images of Sleevo in that game where he was just, like I said, breaking the lines, kicking inside 50, kicked a goal, had a really good assist, was dynamic. And there's a bit of commentary that if you listened to the start of this podcast, you would have heard some commentary from that game where I played in the intro. He was an amazing player, and it's a shame that he hasn't been able to, I guess, fulfill that talent. I guess we'll never really know to what extent it is about that injury, or just if that that hunger and that desire left him to be a professional athlete. But yeah, he even last year, like I said, the first half of 2023, I thought he was really good. There was several games there where he was kicking multiple goals. But yeah, it's probably best that we don't mention that 2022 year where he played off half-back and, had some higher possession games, but some higher turnover games. He really got thrown around during that 2022 year. And I think, yeah, there was potentially a role for him maybe on the wing next year if he had the hunger, but we saw it in that Richmond game, was it? Or maybe it was the last game of the year, but late in the season we saw a bit of a glimpse of maybe what he could do in that role. I think probably that half-forward opportunity, sort of similar to Cooper Harvey, is something that maybe is not there for him. And who knows, maybe if he had not made the decision to retire, potentially someone like Cooper Harvey doesn't get that one-year deal, potentially, because they both play a half-forward role or can play a half-forward role. But yeah, I guess, again, gives us a list spot, gives us some flexibility. And yeah, some of those recontractings that, were a little bit of a question mark do start to make sense now with Jaden Stevenson retiring and Toby Pink moving off the senior list. You're seeing these machinations and the complicated way that this list management works. Sometimes you can get to the end of the trade period and go, I just don't understand how we're going into the draft with that hand. And yeah, I think some of those things are starting to make a little bit more sense now that we've seen a couple of these other things come to light. So yeah, a shame to see the back of him. Similarly, I wish him all the best. I hope that his mental health is in a good space. But yeah, we move on. It's an unfortunate thing. We really hoped that he was going to be not the centerpiece, but a major part of our forward line when we brought him over. Was kind of indirectly part of the Ben Brown trade at the end of 2020. There was some pick that we got from Ben Brown ended up going Collingwood's way. I'm not going to get into the machinations here, but it suffice to say they've both actually retired at the same point, ironically, for very different reasons. In that Ben Brown's got to the end of his career and his body legitimately was giving up on him. He's a premiership player, whereas Jaden Stevenson, in theory, definitely had some footy left in him. But alas, wasn't to be. We move on from him and. I guess look to attack the draft. Speaking of which, I guess let's turn to the draft. Like I mentioned off the top, no movement yet with splitting pick 2. It's looking like it's probably going to be pretty tricky to do. It seems as though we've been canvassing all the options and we've got several contingencies depending on whether we are able to trade back or if we're going to take our pick at pick 2. There's still the possibility that potentially that we trade at pick 2, pick at pick 2, but then find a way to trade back into this draft using some future picks. So that's also a possibility. I just think the trouble at the moment with us splitting the pick is that the top 15 of this draft is, or 15 or so, give or take, is just so even. And so no one really wants to give up 2 picks in that range because there's not a significant difference between, for example, pick 2 and pick 10 in terms of talent. Or I guess there's not agreement within, the draft experts around what those players might look like. So, from that perspective, I guess it's easy to understand why it's been so difficult or to this point impossible for us to split the pick because, pick 2 is a very high pick. Some would say it's the second pick. And in order to, give that up, you're going to want something high and then something at least medium first round. So, there's been a lot of talk about that kind of 6 and 11 range that Richmond have. And I can absolutely see, in theory, I think in a quote-unquote regular draft, something like that might be pretty fair. Maybe, last year's draft, maybe that would work. I think the challenge with this draft is that top group is so even, and so 6 and 11 is probably is more enticing than pick 2, and hence why Richmond's maybe not as interested in that. And I think also there's I guess again it's a year out and a lot can change, but next year's draft allegedly doesn't look quite as strong, and so trading backwards into that draft again is maybe not as enticing to clubs who have these picks high up in this draft. So all of that's just sort of contributing to make our life a little bit difficult and Brady's life a little bit difficult. I mentioned it before, but there has been some talk that we would potentially look at trading pick 2 in this year's draft and our future first with Richmond in order to get 6 and 11. And I know that on paper seems pretty crazy because essentially we'd be downgrading both of those. So if you sort of think about it, it's like downgrading 2 to 6 and then our future first to pick 11. And, our future first could be the first pick, could be second, but it's probably likely to be sort of 2, 3, or 4 again. It's hard to see us climbing any higher than that. So on face value, that looks like an awful deal. And it's hard to argue with parts of that. But again, I think you have to consider the strength of the draft. At the end of the day, the draft pick is just a draft pick that you use to acquire a player. And so it might be that getting 6 and 11 in this draft is actually quite comparable to getting the second best player this draft and then the 4th best player the next draft. There's every possibility that those things are actually quite even, but it's so impossible for us to know that. And again, like you're being asked to project 12 months into the future on what is already a very speculative process in the draft period. So look, I don't think there's a chance that we do that trade straight up, but I do think there is a chance that we would trade pick 2 in our future first for example, 6-11, and then, something else coming back, like a second round pick, something in that realm, just for a bit of, balancing of the points at the very least, because, there are points associated with these picks, which helps the AFL to assess what a fair trade is. Regardless, it looks as though Richmond's not super interested in pick 2, and I can understand that because they have so many picks, and getting it all the way up to 2, how much more of an upgrade is that on their pick at 6 when they also have pick 1? They've got so much choice. The other clubs, I think, goes back to that issue that I'm talking about. It's really hard to entice a club to trade 2 picks out of the top bracket of this draft because it is such a strong, even draft. So, look, that's where it's at. I'm sure Brady is going to work his butt off to try and make something work, but I'm not going to be shocked if he's not able to get something done just because of everything that I've just mentioned there. I think, regardless, at the moment, we have pick 2 and pick 62. And like I said, if we're not able to split pick 2, there's every chance that we look at moving that future first into this draft by trading in. I would have to anticipate, though, that it's going to look bad on paper because we're going to move backwards in theory. So if our future first ends up being maybe pick 3, I think pick 3 is maybe going to end up being worth pick 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 in this draft. And that's just based on the fact that this draft is a stronger draft. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the values that you're trying to assess. So yeah, all of those things are on the table. And like I said, that's something that could happen on draft night as well. We've also submitted the paperwork, as I mentioned earlier, to pick up River Stevens, Anthony Stevens' son, under the father-son rule. We haven't selected him yet, but we've submitted the paperwork so that we could. And my understanding is that if he's not bid on by any clubs, which is very possible, quite the possibility, we can essentially just pick him up at the end of the draft without using a selection. So we don't need to use 62 on him. I think we could, but I don't think we need to. So I guess that's worth noting. It looks as though we will select him. And, I guess the expectations around him probably need to be pretty similar to those of Cooper Harvey. He's not coming out with massive draft stocks, but, there's every potential that he goes on to become something. So that's a wait and watch. In terms of the players that we're interested in at the top of the draft, this is not an area that I profess to be an expert in. I do my reading, I look at what Cal Toomey says, and I listen to what the draft experts say, but I'm not watching the footage, and I don't pretend that I am watching the footage of these potential draftees. I'm sure many of my listeners would know that Alex Taru has been the one that we've been pretty heavily linked with, us and half the AFL competition for what it's worth. But he's been touted as a bit of a bolter and someone that, has come from outside the top 10 projections to now being in that top 10 projections. He's a 193 centimetre defender, a very athletic player. I guess all the talk is he's probably not projected to be the second best player at this draft necessarily. but there is the chance that someone wants to take a punt on him that high, and we're someone that needs that taller type of player. He's not yet a full key position size, but there is the chance that he still grows at 193, and he's 17 or 18 years old, so he could still fill out and become key position size. Either way, he has the ability to swing forward and play back. He's very athletic and is definitely the type of player that probably fits our list profile. So he's one to watch, but there's excitement around him, don't get me wrong, but he does seem like a bit of a risk, I suppose, because he's less proven over a long period of time. But that's one that we've been linked to, and someone that I would think it's worth having a look at. The other key forward or key position player, I should say, that is around that area of the draft is Harry Armstrong, a 195 centimetre forward. Again, would appear to fit our list profile. We did pick up Will Dawson last draft period as a key position player, but I think we understand that our key position stocks are pretty thin. We hope that Charlie Comben becomes a great player as a key position player for us. We know that Nick Larkey is that, and then we've got some bit part players like Pink, like Brent Eagle. We've brought across Jack Darling as a bit of a gap filler. So I would expect us to be targeting those sorts of players this draft again, but not definitively with that pick 2. And I think that's probably what some people need to get their heads around, is potentially we do pick a midfielder with pick 2 if we hold it. I know that might seem crazy, but look, I think realistically we have a good midfield, but we don't necessarily bat really, really, really deep, and we don't bat as deep as I think some people think we do. I'm going to look at doing a list profile in the next few weeks, hopefully, and whether or not that's before or after the draft, I'm not too sure. But we know that Wardlaw is going to be a gun. I think we know that Tommy Powell's going to be a gun. LDU is a gun, and let's really hope that he's not going to leave us. And then it starts to become question marks in some way. Like Will Phil seems like possibly one that's not going to work out. Luke Parker is a great get for the next couple of years, but is obviously not a long-term solution. Jai Simpkin looks like he was going to be a really long-term midfielder for us, but there's some question marks over whether or not he has that explosiveness and cleanliness to do that long-term, and whether or not he's maybe more of a half forward and half midfielder. There's potential to discuss that kind of thing. So I guess, look, I don't think Colby McKercher is another one that we expect to move through there, but maybe is he more of a wingman potentially? Harry Sheasel could be a fantastic midfielder, but he could also be a really good forward player. So these are discussions that list profile-wise, if you're saying all of those are midfielders, great, we've got some players, but maybe that's not the best position to play all of these players, and how long do we expect them to be around? So I actually wouldn't be shocked if we did select best available talent at pick 2, which, on paper really is going to be a midfielder. That could be a player like Sam Lawler, could be Vito Sullivan or Langford, depending on who Richmond select at pick 1. I really hope that we do bid on Levi Ashcroft when we get the chance. It sounds as though Richmond will not do that. I really think we have to hold, Brisbane points accountable. I hope that we're not playing nice boys with them. So that's one to watch. But yeah, I just think in my heart of hearts, if you've got to pick that high, I think you're kind of bound to pick the best available talent. If we genuinely think that's Alex Taru, or we think that Alex Taru is like the 3rd or 4th best player, and so you're only really excluding 1 or 2 players, I'm okay with that. But if we genuinely think that Alex Taru, for example, or same with Harry Armstrong, if we genuinely think that they're more around the 10th, 11th, 12th best player in the draft, I think at pick 2, you're duty bound to pick the best player or very close to the best player available. So that's my thoughts at the moment. I guess things could change if we are able to split the pick or if things move around. But I do wonder if our strategy is to pick the best midfielder at 2 and then try to find our way back into the draft to select someone like Armstrong or Taru, a little bit later on at pick 6 or 7 or 8, like in that kind of area. And I think in order to do that, if we're not able to split pick 2, it would have to involve our future first. There's no question about that. So that is one to watch on draft night to see if that's something that we're able to get done. And yeah, I think it's really hard to make an evaluation about what we're likely to do just because there's so many unknowns around what picks we're going to go into the draft with and how we're going to use them. But I guess that's, in terms of a brief overview of what we're doing, River Stevens is going to get there. Beyond that, I'm just not certain about anything. But I do know, and I feel quite confident that we will select a key position player somehow, whether that's through buying back into the draft, whether that's later on with a rookie selection. I think there'll have to be some key selection players selected. Where that happens, I'm not too sure. Last talking point for this podcast is off-field, and I alluded to off the top. We are selling some home games to Perth. It looks like it's going to happen. It's whether or not the AFL approves it, so to speak, and allows it to happen. But it looks as though we're going to sell two home games to Perth. One to be played at Optus Stadium, one to be played at Bunbury, which is about an hour out of Perth, as I understand it. The contract we're hoping for is 3 years, and that we'll play those two games back to back, so on consecutive weekends, so that you're only flying there, staying there for a week, and then flying back. That's what the plan looks like. What that means for Hobart is still a little bit up in the air. We are supposed to have another year in our contract to play in Hobart those 4 games, and I think it looks as though what North Melbourne wanted to do was to play 2 in Hobart next year and 2 in Perth, and then potentially continue playing 2 in Hobart going forward, or just drop Hobart altogether and move those games back to Melbourne. I'm not too sure where that's at the moment, and there is some talk potentially that we just won't play in Hobart at all next year as a result of this deal. I think it is important that we have an exit strategy from Hobart. We know that the Tasmanian footy team is going to come in quite soon, not next season, but in the next 5 years they're coming in, and so we do need a plan to make some money outside of Tasmania, because that money is going to dry up. Money is a requirement. At the end of the day, this is a business, and we as a club are duty bound to make business decisions. I understand that some fans are unhappy with that. They want their club to be mostly based in Melbourne, and that's totally reasonable. I think that's a reasonable request, and it makes sense. Of course we want our club to be based in Melbourne, but the reality is we are the smallest club in Melbourne, and we're a very unsuccessful on-field club at the moment. We have been for quite a while now, and that puts quite a strain on money. So financially, it just makes sense that we're trying to, make up that money that we're going to lose from Tasmania eventually and make it up elsewhere. We have been able to be, minorly profitable with some AFL support over the last little while, but you don't get that way just by sitting on your hands. And I think ultimately like I said, we need an exit strategy from Hobart. The Hobart government, or the Tasmanian government, is not going to pay us any more to play there, because they've got their own side to potentially be supporting, and they're building a massive stadium there in part. So there's a lot going on down in Tassie. In terms of going specifically to Perth, we do have a fan base over there. I think potentially it's been a little bit overblown in terms of the size of our fan base over there. We are still a small club. Let's not kid ourselves. But of course, there are some North Melbourne fans over in Perth. I think the fact that the WA government would contribute if the deal was to happen, I think, is the big kicker. And then, you'll also pack out Optus Stadium, whether or not you play Freo or West Coast. You're going to fill that stadium because there's so many footy fans in Perth, and whilst it's a North Melbourne home game, they're going to attend those fans. So, I think from a monetary perspective, it makes total sense. I understand the rhetoric around kind of throwing away games because you're choosing to play home games against the away side, if that makes sense. I don't think it does. You know what I mean, though? You're choosing to play a home game against West Coast in Perth, and so therefore you're putting yourself at a bit of a disadvantage on field. And yeah, that is true, but footy's a business, and right now we're not winning games anyway. So I'd be more concerned about this and what this looks like, if it's going to cost us a final spot. But realistically, it's not going to cost us a final spot next year, because we wouldn't win the games wherever they're played. Hopefully we are beating West Coast, so I put that on the table. But, we're not expecting to beat Freo at the moment, and we're not expecting to beat many sides at the moment. So doesn't really matter where we play. Maybe that's a bit defeatist, but we're in the business of making money, and I guess I just understand it. I don't sit here going, I can't wait for those games in Perth. So that's not me, but I just understand it, and I'm not angry or upset about it. I think we just have to understand that, this is not the first time, it's not even the third time that we've tried to get money for playing games elsewhere. Obviously, we've been playing down in Hobart for the last little while. We've played in Sydney in my lifetime. We've played in Canberra. We've played on the Gold Coast. There are so many places that we have played football games that are not Melbourne. So this is not a new thing for us at all. It's a way that we support ourselves financially. It's not ideal, but it's a reality of being a really small club. So I guess that's my thoughts about it. I would love to hear, Rusted On fans' opinions on that, because I acknowledge that I am just one person, and I know that there are some people that feel very strongly about this issue. So feel free to comment or get in touch with me on social media in terms of how you feel about this decision. It's not confirmed yet, so we'll wait and see what happens, but it's certainly something that it sounds as though the club is trying to get across and happen. And I guess I would say the AFL would tick it off if fixture-wise they can make it happen. Playing down in Bunbury is barely a home ground advantage. Certainly, whoever we played there is not familiar with the ground. They're going to have more supporters, but it's an unfamiliar ground. So there's still some home ground advantage there, but it is more diminished. I know there are statistics that speak to home ground advantage. And in general, the home ground advantage is more to do with the home crowd. And let's be honest, it's pretty rare. It's not unheard of, but it's pretty rare that we're playing with the most fans anyway. Just, any game we're playing in Melbourne, we tend to be outnumbered if it's another Melbourne side. So it's nothing that's that's unfamiliar to us. We are very used to being outnumbered in the crowd. But anyway, that's my thoughts. I guess we'll wait and see what happens there. I think next year's fixture will get released in the next month or so, and we'll be able to have a look at it and potentially see what that looks like for us. And that is going to do it for the podcast this week. It ended up being, a pretty regular length. I was thinking it might be a little shorter, but I probably jabbered on a little bit about some of those talking points. So, yeah, thank you for listening. I'll be getting along to the AFLW final this weekend, so looking forward to that. Hopefully I'm able to get this podcast out before then. Otherwise, it's going to sound a little silly. Yeah, I'll certainly be back to talk about the draft. I'm hoping to do a bit of a preview, but we'll see if that works out or if I end up doing a review, and I'll certainly be keeping up with the AFLW content through finals, so you can tune in for that. I do hope that you are having a wonderful week, and hopefully, I'll speak to you and you'll be listening to me in the coming days. As always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.